Now that we've added in our columns and anchor bolts, the next step is going to be detailing the erection view drawings so that we can get this sent to the field and get the anchor bolts in place. We will then continue into the basics of Drawing Editor, including modifying dimensions and labels, adding dimensions, creating a sheet outline, adding an erection view, and then plotting the sheet. So first, what we need to do is detail an erection view. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm at the home screen right now, so I'm going to go ahead and just launch into modeling. And once our modeling opens up, I'm just going to go ahead and open a view. I'll open my anchor bolt framing plan view. And then what we need to do is we need to navigate to our drawings page. And then in the placement section is where we can find our detail erection views. So if we hover over that tool, it says detail erection views. I'm going to go ahead and select this. And this will bring up a window. It wants us to select an erection view that we want to detail. So the first thing is we can see that we don't have any views that show up in this window. And the reason that is because all of our views, when we created them, we marked them for detailing. So the first thing we'll need to do is go down here to the bottom for our filter, and we'll need to check on show for detailing. So it places them in that separate list there. And now once that filter is checked on, we can see all of our erection views that we have created. So first we're going to take a look at some different settings inside of our detail erection views. So what we need to do before we can get into settings is choose a view that we want to detail. So in our case, we're going to choose anchor bolt framing plan. And now we can go over here to the right and click on settings. And this is going to bring up our detail erection view defaults. So we'll go through our detail erection view defaults window and look at some of the different settings we can set up for when detailing erection views. Now these can either be set up by default, or you can do this on a view by view basis. If I were to go back and look, we also have different methods of detailing erection views. Right now, these settings we are taking a look at are going to deal with the automatic method, and we'll take a look at how to detail an erection view manually. But first, let's just go through this window here. So in our Appearance tab, we have our steel member style first. We can either specify if we want that to show as stick, wire, solid, or if we want a combination of stick and wire, or stick and solid. If we had concrete members in here, we can also choose if we want those to show as hidden, stick, wire, solid, stick and wire, or stick and solid. And then off to the right, if we were to choose one of those styles, we can choose our line styles here as well. So on the left, we have our member type. If you have a concrete wall, you can check this on. And once this is checked on, that allows you to pick the different line style. I'm going to just leave these set to default, and I'm going to say cancel here. Below that, we have our rebar material style. Below that, we have our 3D hidden line style. We can choose if we want to have those removed, if we want them dashed, or if we want those as solid lines. Right now, I'm just going to keep that as removed. We also have the option to show 3D main member material. So in our case, for most of our columns, we have them input as our UCS material. That's what that would be. We have the same option to show our 3D submaterial. That would be any material that would be connected to those columns or any member. We have the ability to show 3D shop bolts and field bolts. We can show 3D holes, shop welds, field welds. We can show our stair outline. We can show shear tab location on erection views. If we had concrete members in here, we could show concrete hatching, and we can change the scale of that hatching in this window here. We could set a status display criteria in here, which we won't do at this moment. We can look at that a little bit later on in the training. We can show crane placements and show the steel laydown for that. And we have the ability to move grid lines for crane placement. Up at the top here, we can reset member line pins. If we have an existing member pin, we can change the color of that existing member pin, and we can also change our existing member line type. As you can see, these fields are grayed out because these options are not checked on. As soon as I check these options on, it gives us the ability to specify something different there. We can show vertical braces that are not in this plane. We can either show them as is, we can show, or we can hide. We can do the same for horizontal braces. For our member orientation indicators, do we want to show all, none, conditional, or as is? If that is set to conditional, we can specify our conditions there. In this case, we're going to show all. And then down here at the bottom, we have the option, where applicable, generate individual rebars instead of rebar run objects when the associated number of runs is less than or equal to our number that you want to specify. And again, this isn't going to really matter for us since we don't have any rebar in this view. Next, we'll take a look at our annotations tab. So at the very top here, under annotations, we have remove drawing annotations. We can have that either set to none, system, or all. And this is going to apply when redetailing erection views. So if we were to have already had this erection view detailed, and say this is our second time going through and detailing it, or we are redetailing this view, if we would leave this set to none and have this annotate erection views box checked on, it wouldn't remove any of the drawing annotations that were previously set. So therefore you would have double of your dimensions and double of your system drawing annotations. So we'll look at that a little bit closer when we get into redetailing erection views. For now, being that this is the first time this view is being detailed, we can just leave that set to none. Down below here, we have our checkbox that says annotate erection views. Below that, we have an option to dimension grids above and left of a structure. And if we have that checked on, we can add an overall dimension with above left grid dimensions. Below that, we have dimension grids below and right of structure. And again, if that's checked on, we have that option to add the overall dimension. We can add overall dimension to section view grids. We can annotate finite grid lines in place. We have the ability to show grid names on non-plan views. And then we can show height of our secondary grid bubbles. Do we want those to be the same as our primary grid bubbles, or do we want them to be below our primary grid bubbles? Below that, we have an option that we will want to use for our particular erection view since this is the anchor bolt plan. So this is our option to dimension anchor bolt layout. I will go ahead and check that on. And with this checked on, we can show bottom of base plate elevation as an absolute, or do we want that as a reference? We can specify below here what our bottom of base plate prefix is. So in here we can type in anything we want our prefix to be. In this case, I'm going to leave that as B/BP space EL for bottom of base plate elevation. Below that, do we want to scale anchor bolt layout? And then we have a scale factor below that. In this case, I'm not going to scale our anchor bolt layout. Below that, we can explode our erection view. Do we want to generate named locations? And do we want to detail with revisions? Back up at the top, we can change our character height for grid bubble labels. We can change our minimum piece mark and section size height allowed. We can change how to show elevation on member. Do we want that as an absolute, a reference, or do we not want to show that? Below that, we can show on our erection views. Do we want to show camber on our members? Do we want to show custom properties on our members? We can show section size on custom members. We can denote non-standard material. Do we want to show number of studs on members? Do we want to see the member number on our erection views? We can show non-standard field bolts, and we can show field welds. And if we are showing field welds, do we want to show the field weld lengths? So now that we're done here, let's go ahead and go to our piece marks tab. First, we have the option to check overriding of piece marks and section sizes. So if this option is checked on, the system will automatically go through, and if you have piece marks or section sizes that are overlapping one another, or if it's a really busy erection view where it doesn't have a lot of space and things are touching each other, it'll try to go through and put those piece marks and section sizes into a place where they're not overlapping one another. Do we want to relocate piece marks and other member labels to default locations? So with this second checkbox, if we were redetailing a view, if this was checked on, this would relocate all of our piece marks and other member labels back to the default locations. If you were to had moved them around the first time when you detailed the erection view, then this option would move those piece marks and other labels back. Below that, we can allow member piece marks to break lines and wire member edges. We have the option to always hide joist piece marks. We can include base plate minor piece marks on anchor bolt layouts. And then off to the right, for our cross section marks, we can show our new piece marks. We can show, for our old piece marks, we can either show as is, show, or hide. And then the same for our section sizes. And then down below here, we have the same exact options for our non-cross section marks. The last thing we're going to go ahead and change before we say OK to this window is we're going to go back to our Appearance tab. And then for our steel member style, we're going to change that from stick to wire. So once you've made that change, you can go ahead and say OK to this window. And now we're going to go ahead and say OK to this window as well, since we were only in the settings option there. We only want to have our anchor bolt framing plan selected, since that's the one we want to detail. So once I say OK to this here, the system will go through and generate that erection view. As you can see here, the process is done with generating that erection view. So we have two different options for this window, and this option will be available in some other similar windows as we continue on in the training. If we choose to say close when done, the next time an erection view will be generated, this option will remain checked on, and it will automatically close this window when it is done creating that erection view. So if I check this on right here, it's just going to go ahead and automatically close that window for us. And then the next time we generate an erection view, that window will not pop up. You may see it for a short period of time, but it will automatically close it for us. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and launch our drawing editor window. so we can open up that erection view that got detailed. To open up our drawing editor, we can do that a couple of different ways. If we wanted to, we could launch our drawing editor under our drawings page. There's a little icon here. If we hover over it, it says drawing editor. Or if we want to close out of our modeling window, or we can minimize our modeling window and go back to our home screen, the other option we have down here, right beside modeling, is our drawing editor. So if I click on this, it's going to go ahead and open up our drawing editor. And here is where all of our drawings are going to live at. Right now, we don't see anything in this list because it is set to be looking at details. And since we haven't made any member details in our job yet, this list will remain empty. So what we need to do is we need to select a different filter, and since we detailed an erection view, what we can do is come down here and select erection views, and we see that our anchor bolt framing plan that we just detailed is now on the list. So I can go ahead and select the anchor bolt framing plan and say OK, and that will open up our anchor bolt framing plan erection view. If we take a quick look here, we can see that it named this plan our anchor bolt framing plan, and if we zoom in down here at the bottom, we see that our bottom of base plate elevation is at elevation 0, is bottom of base plate elevation unless noted. And since all of our base plates were input at our elevation of 0, we won't see any discrepancies there or any notes saying that our base plates are at a different elevation. Now we can just run through a general overview of how Drawing Editor works, and we'll take a look at some of our dimensions and piece marks. To start off with, if we middle click, we can pan around in Drawing Editor. Our mouse wheel, if we scroll up, we can zoom in based off of where our mouse cursor is. And if we scroll down, we can zoom out of the drawing based off of where our mouse cursor is. So if we take a look at our column at A1, if I wanted to scroll in here and move this dimension, what I can do is come in here and hover over it until it highlights in yellow, and I can left click on my mouse and drag. As you can see, you can drag it left or right, or you can move it up and down. If I wanted to change something about this dimension text, I could simply just come up to the text and double click on it, and this would bring up our edit dimension window. And in here we can change things like our origin. Do we want a border around it? Do we want an underline or strike through? We can set our justification if that's left, center, or right. We can change our pen color. We can change things like our fonts, what our font style is, if that's bold or regular. And then here is where we can change our font size, and then our font aspect ratio. And then we can also specify our rotation. I also have the same exact options for our secondary dimensions. So if I had another dimension down below this line, or let's say I wanted to add one in, I can click down here in this text box, and for now I'll just say test. If I would click OK to this, then we can see that that gets added underneath our dimension. I don't want that to be there, so I'm going to go ahead and edit this dimension again, and I'm just going to delete this out. Below here, we can change which view that text is associated with. We can change our layer that this dimension is associated with. because I've made changes to this layer, it has automatically put it to the user adjusted layer. We can either have that set to detail rule annotations, our reference dimension layer, our user annotation layer, our system annotation layer, or our outline layer. For now, I'm going to change this back to our system annotation layer. Change what our work point ID is. We can change the size of dimension terminals. Do we want breakable dimension legs? We can limit left leg length to and our right leg length to. Off to the right, our force expansion offset on neither leg, right top leg, left bottom leg, or both legs. And then we can also set the pen color down there below. I'm going to go ahead and say OK to this window. And now we're back with the original dimension that I had. I can also move and drag labels the same way. So let's see, we can see here that this label is actually interfering with this dimension line. So I can just simply left click and drag this label to bring it out a little bit more. And I can do that for my label here as well. If we wanted to change the rotation of these labels, we can do that in a couple of different ways. If I double click on this label, we can go in here under our section size and specify our rotation degrees. Right now it's at 45. Say if I change that to 0 and say OK, we can see that that rotation changes. Now there are also a couple different ways that we can do this. If I hit the Control button on my keyboard and then I left click on this label and drag my mouse around, I can see that I can change the rotation in this manner as well. Now, if I say I rotate it there, I can see that this is at a weird rotation degrees, so 12.8477, and that's not really a precise rotation. So if I wanted to rotate that in a different manner, I could also hit Shift Control and then left click on that label, and then what I can do is rotate my mouse around and it will rotate that in 45-degree increments. If we wanted to, we could come in here and change our dimensions and how we see those lines being dimensioned to. So if I come in here and just click on this leg here, this dimension, I can see that if I drag this out, our dimension will automatically change. So this is kind of a smart dimension type thing. If I get close to this, the outside of this base plate here, it wants to automatically snap to that. So you can zoom in and you can snap to different sorts of things. Right now that was going to our anchor bolts. But let's say we didn't pick something like that and we left click and we get a different dimension here than what we want. In Drawing Editor, unlike in our modeling screen or our modeling window, we do have the ability to undo. So let's say I wanted to come up here and underneath clipboard, we have this undo arrow. Control Z also works for this, so we can either hit Control Z on our keyboard, or we could come up here and hit undo. And as you can see, that dimension automatically changes back to what it was before. Your undo will always undo your most recent command. If I would come in here and edit this dimension and I say freeze label, I'm going to go ahead and say OK to this. Now if we try to change this dimension leg, we can see that no matter where I drag that to, that 165 is going to stay the same. So if I drag it clear out to here, that dimension will always be froze because we specified that to be frozen. So again, I'm going to come in here, I'm going to click undo so that my dimension line goes back to where it was. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to unfreeze that label. and I will say OK. The next thing we'll take a look at is adding in our own dimensions. So I'm going to zoom out and let's say we want to maybe add a dimension in here specifying how far away this base plate is to this base plate over here. Now, Drawing Editor is going to follow the same style of ribbons as it did as our modeling window did. So up top we have our different pages. We have drafting, drawings, display, import, export, and then we have a reports page. So within all of those pages we have our different sections. So we have drawings, clipboard, navigate, layout, draw, annotations, tools, standards, and bill of material. So inside of our annotations we have a dimension add, or as you can see our F3 key on our keyboard would run that command. So I'm going to go ahead and just click on this. Once I run the dimension add, we can see that our contextual ribbon for our snaps and modifiers will come up like it did in our modeling window. So let's say in this case I want to use my auto point snap. So the little horseshoe icon turns on our auto point. And now in our status line, we can see we want to add dimension points 1. So let's say we want to pick the edge of this base plate, and let's just pick the other edge of this base plate here as well for our point number 2. Once we pick that, then we can drag out off into space, and it will automatically fill out that distance accordingly. So I can place this. I can either have the ability to place it as an actual dimension, or if I move my mouse up, we can place that as a vertical dimension. So let's just say I want to place that here. I will left click on my mouse again to locate the dimension line. So if I left click here, then you can see it will continue. So if we wanted to come up here and pick a different point and say we want to go to the intersection of this, we can go ahead and add our dimension point 3 to locate that dimension as well. Or if we didn't want that, what we could do is we could either right click or we could hit escape on our keyboard to escape out of that dimension add. Now as you can see, we still have our dimension add tool active because it wants us to select points. So I could come over here and I could pick another point to add a dimension. So let's say we just want to do this one. I could do the same thing. I could locate that dimension here. I want that to be vertical, so I'm going to move my mouse up. And then I just want to escape on my keyboard to get out of that. And now we have our 2 dimensions added in for those base plates. To get out of the add dimension tool, we can just escape on our keyboard, and we are back to our regular drawing editor. So now we can take a look at a couple different options we can use while adding in dimensions. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take these dimensions and I'm just going to delete them off. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run our dimension add tool again. And as you can see, this left side toolbar options, like it did in modeling, it will populate with the most recently used. So I'm going to go ahead and run that command again. And then down here, if we're looking at our button bindings, if I press Shift, that will change our button bindings to what the command wants us to do. So if I hit Shift, we can see that our left click turns into actual and our middle click turns into drag off. So let's just say I wanted to come down here and I press Shift on my keyboard and I middle click. Now what it's asking us for is to select a side for a dimension. So if I come over here, I can see that it wants me to select a line. So if I select this line, for example, it automatically is going to take that line, and now I can just drag off that dimension to a spot where I want to locate that dimension line. So I'll locate that here. So we can see, since I'm still in the dimension add tool, if I hit my shift button, it gives us the actual dimension for left click, our drag off dimension for middle click. If I hit control, our left click turns into an arc dimension, our middle click gives us an angle dimension, and if I would hit shift and control at the same time, our left click would turn into an actual dimension, our middle click would be a vertical dimension, and our right click would be a horizontal dimension. So by using our button bindings, we can predetermine what type of dimension that we want to add, or if we come in here and choose just 2 random points, we can drag our mouse around and the system will try to decide what type of dimension it wants to add in there. So between actual, horizontal, vertical, you can make that whatever type of dimension you want to. And then say if I want to locate it out there, I can come in here and I can drag these dimensions around however I would need to. For now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select both of these dimensions that we just added, and I will delete these out. And if we wanted to, we could go around and see if we want to add any more dimensions or move any marks around or labels around. For right now, I think that has it laid out pretty well for us. So next, we'll get into creating our sheet outlines so that we can get that on a sheet and get that plotted and sent out. Some jobs will have sheet outlines created by default, and if we wanted to use one of those default ones, we could, or we could create our own. To get to our sheet outlines, what we'd have to do is go up to our open folder in the drawing section, so that'd be this icon here, or we can Control O on our keyboard. When I click this window will pop up. Right now we are looking at our erection views. We can change this filter to our sheet outlines, and here is where it'll show all of our default sheet outlines. If we wanted to create our own sheet outline, we could come up here to the new and create our own sheet outline, but for now we're going to go ahead and just use our E24 by 36 sheet outline. I'm going to go ahead and open that up by selecting that and saying OK. And now we are looking at that sheet outline. In here we can see that it's got a logo, it's got a revision chart, and then some basic information for our title block down below here. To edit this information, I can simply just click on my title block. I'll double click, and now I can go ahead and enter some information that we want to see in our title block. In here, if we want to enter in anything for these fields, we can say who it was approved by, who it was checked by, we can enter the date, say who it was drawn by, what the project number is, and what our scale is. For example, I'm going to come in here for the drawn by, and I'm just going to type in instructor. And then I'm going to say OK. And as we can see, that field automatically gets populated per what I typed in that other field. If I wanted to specify any more information, I could do so by double clicking in here again and going in and editing any field that I would want to. For right now, I'm going to leave what we see here in here. One thing to note that the E24 by 36 is going to automatically update and populate based off of what our drawing name is. So as we can see down here at the bottom, our drawing is actually named E24 by 36. So when we get in there and create our first erection sheet and add a different drawing to that, that will automatically populate based off of what that drawing name is down there. One thing we'll do before exiting out of this sheet outline and saving our changes is looking at adding a job north arrow. So I could go about this in a couple different ways. If I wanted to actually come in here and draw my own arrow, I could come in here to the line add, and I could try to draw in lines and create my own arrows and such. That way, I don't really want to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to undo that line. What we could do next is add in a standard detail. So to do that, we could find our add standard detail icon. So that is in our drafting page. If we come all the way over here to our standard section, we can see that we have add standard detail, or that is SA on our keyboard. So we can enter into that tool. And once I click this, it's going to bring up another window, and it's going to show us where our job standard details are, where our global standard details are, and where if we had any submaterials in here, it would show us that as well. In this case, we're going to want to click on our global standards. In here, we can see that we have a north arrow 1, 2, and a 3. So we can come in here and easily select an already created arrow. So in this instance, I'm just going to pick the first one and I'm going to say OK. And we can see that it comes in here into our drawing or into our sheet outline, and we can place it wherever we would like to. We have some different options down here where we can change the scale. If we wanted to change the rotation, we could do that here. We could check on mirror image, and we can check on remember these values for the next invocation. For now, I'm going to go ahead and just place it somewhere on our sheet. So I'm going to go ahead and let's just say we want to locate it down here next to our title block. So I'm going to just pick a point right here, and I'm going to left click to place that. It comes up again if we would want to add that again. In this case I don't, so I can either escape or I can right click on my mouse to get out of that command. And now we can see we have our north arrow in here as our job, as a job standard detail. So now what I can do is I can come up here into the upper left corner, and there's a save icon. You can either hit Control S to save, or you can come up here and just click the save icon. And now the changes that we made are saved to this sheet outline. What we can do now is go ahead and open again, and what we would want to do now is go to our erection sheets. In here there is nothing to be selected. What we'll need to do is actually create an erection sheet. So I'm going to go over here and hit the new button, and we can give it a drawing name. You can choose whatever drawing name you want. For this instance, I'm going to just choose E101. I'm going to say OK. The next thing it wants us to do is pick a sheet outline that we want to use for this erection sheet. So in this case, we're going to pick the same exact E24 by 36 since that's the one we made our changes to. So I'm going to either double click on that or select that and say OK. And now we can see we have our updated sheet information down here where it says instructor. We got our north arrow. And now that our drawing says E101, our title block says E101 based off of that drawing name. If I wanted to come in here and change something about this title block, I could come in here and simply just double click like we did on the sheet outline. And this will bring up our title block edit window. We can come in here and change something about this. However, if you did change it here, it would only change on this erection sheet, and it would not change anything on that sheet outline. So all of the other sheets, if we had other sheets that were using this sheet outline, would not update. I don't need to change anything here, so I'm going to go ahead and say cancel. So what we can do now is actually add our erection view to our sheet. To do this, we'll need to do a sheet item add. And we can do this in a couple different ways. If we didn't know where that was, we could come up here and use our search bar like we did in our modeling. So we could type in sheet item, and what we'd want to do is our sheet item add. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and go to my drawings page, and under our sheets, this is where that icon is going to live. So this is our sheet item add, so you can either just click on this item, you can either click on this icon, or you can use SC on your keyboard. And what we can do there is this allows you to pick either a detail, a job standard detail, a submaterial detail, or any erection view detail that we have. Since the only thing we have is our erection view detail, I'm going to go ahead and either double click on that or highlight that and say OK. And what this will allow us to do is bring in our erection view detail, and as you can see, the dotted white line is going to be the extents of our detail, and it's wanting me to place this on the sheet so I can get that where I want that. And I'm going to go ahead and just left click to locate that detail, and now we can see that detail gets added to our sheet. Now the select erection view window came up again. If we wanted to add multiple different details to this one sheet, we could do so. In this case, since we only have our anchor bolt framing plan, I'm just going to go ahead and say cancel to this window, and now we can see we have our detail on our sheet. Now since we located it in that one spot, that doesn't mean that it's permanent to that spot. If I click anywhere inside of this viewport area, I can just single click and drag this detail around to where I'd want that. Or if I double click inside of this viewport, this will bring up our edit sheet item window, and this is where we could go in, and if we wanted to change the scale, we could change it here. If we wanted to rotate this detail around, we could do that inside of this window. In this case, I don't want to change anything about the scale or rotations. I'm going to just cancel out of this window, and I'm going to move this detail to the area I want it on that sheet. So right there's good. And if we were to make any other changes to this sheet, right now we don't want to. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click my save button again to save our sheet item onto this sheet. And now we can take a look at exporting the sheet and plotting the sheet. So to get this printed out, we could do this in a couple different ways. If we take a look at our drawings page, in our print section, we have our print, we have our print to PDF, and we have our plotting icon here. So we could hit either of those, or if we wanted to, we could go to our main menu, and under export, under our 2D, we can either export a PDF drawing, or we could plot here. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to export a PDF drawing. And in here, we can see our sheet E101 is selected. Now, if I look at my destination, I can click on printer. I actually have my printer selected. So if I wanted to create a PDF, let's say, we could change this to disk. And then by default, our directory is set to go to our output folder within our SDS2 program data, or our data directory. We could change this location if we hit browse. And then I could come up here and I could say I want to pick on my desktop. I could say OK, and now that's going to change it to go to my desktop. So if I say OK to this window here, what it's going to do is that changed the directory, so now we actually have to say OK to this window again. If I say OK here, normally it would go through and create that and plot that erection sheet. It didn't this time because we have this opened. So I'm going to say OK to this, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close my other windows. that I have in here, and I'll try that again. So I'm going to go into export PDF drawing. I'm going to go ahead and select this sheet, and I'm going to change my output again. As you can see, that is by default. So I'm going to hit disk, browse, choose my desktop, say OK, and then say OK again. Now if we minimize here, we can see that we have our PDF E101. If I double click on that, we can see that our PDF did get generated, and we can send that out to whoever we'd want to.